So far, we've played with Illustrator. We've looked at how it exports things. We've looked at some of the things that you can do with particular formats that you can export in. But let's actually make something. So we're going to make like a logo or an icon. So I've taken a picture here of just some sketches I've done of an icon or a logo possibility. And I'm going to do a camera. And so I've got some sketches here, some that I didn't quite like, some that I liked, some that weren't quite there yet. So I started here and I kind of played with different things and didn't quite like this. I sort of liked this. There's some different things in here. But I think for sort of simplicity and sort of modern design, we're going to go with sort of this funky shape for a camera, which is based on sort of your DSLRs that are currently out there in production. So that's my goal right there. Let's go ahead and actually crop that so I don't have all of the extra stuff around. There we go, crop. All right. And we'll just kind of put that, I don't know, maybe down there. Now, I probably could have done more designs. Actually, I could have definitely done more designs. But this is just sort of an exercise. So I just did a few designs to find one that I'm happy with. Obviously, if I was working with a client or somebody, I would do quite a few more designs because they might not like that one. Even though I do, they might not. But for an exercise, this will work. So we're just going to go File, New. And yeah, that will be fine. The exact size doesn't matter a whole lot right now, just as we're learning. So let's move this over a little bit more so I can see my design and move that there. Alright, so what we're going to talk about today is building with shapes. So we've played with the shapes some, I've shown you the shapes some, hopefully you've gotten sort of the hang of them. So we're going to create this icon down here, or this logo down here, with some shapes. So if I click and hold down, I've got all these options, and I think the best one to start with is probably the rounded rectangle, because this looks sort of like a rounded rectangle with some extra little bumps and bits on it. We'll just go ahead and start big, something like this. That looks pretty good. My corners aren't rounded as much as I need. Let's actually go ahead and delete that. I'm going to try clicking and seeing what happens. There we go. This is what I was hoping to get. So I've got width, and I've got height, and I've got corner radius. Let's try modifying that to maybe like 50. That's pretty good. I think that was a pretty good estimate. And maybe I want my camera to be maybe like a mid-tone blue. Most people like blue. Blue is pretty gender neutral. So I'm going to go with blue, so it's hopefully targets both audiences a little bit better, but I'm not sure if I like that shade. Maybe more like that. I think that looks pretty good. If I click on my shape, you can see these points. If I switch to the white arrow, the direct selection tool, we didn't really talk about this yet, but this allows me to click on these points and modify the anchors to the way that I need them. Well, that's not the only issue here. Part of the issue is that this is not having any sort of change based on where this is, only the left side is. So I need to change that from a corner right here to instead smooth. So we'll go to smooth, and there we go. That's a little bit more what I'm looking for, and I can start to try to change this to look sort of the way that I want, right? Let's grab the pen tool. If I grab the pen tool, I can add points. So if I click and hold down, I've got add anchor point, and I can add in some anchor points where I want, and that allows me to have more control over how this bends to start trying to get the shape that I want. Now I could try to make this shape out of that, but I don't think I want to, because it's going to add quite a few anchor points in here and probably take a lot of time. So instead, let's make that smooth. Instead, what I think I want to do is I think I want to add a shape to it and then join the two together. So that might sound a little weird or a little difficult, but it's really not very hard. I'm going to go ahead and grab my shape tool again, my rounded rectangle. My corners don't need to be that rounded, so I'm going to click to modify the corner radius. Maybe 10 was good actually on this one. that looks pretty good. That looks about the roundness I want. But the shape itself is too big, so let's go ahead and delete that. Now that I've modified that rounding radius, that's going to apply to any new ones that I draw or that I drag out. So maybe around that big. That looks about right, I think. And let's go in here and modify some of these points. So I'm going back to my direct selection tool, and I'm going to drag some of these around to get sort of the shape that I want. So if I click on the anchor, I can drag it where I want, and I can start to get the shape that I want. Now this is a little wonky up here, because keep in mind these are currently set to corner, and I want them smooth to work a little bit better with the shape and not be so drastic. Let's zoom in a little bit. Command plus to zoom in. And I can start to move some of these around a little bit and try to get it to be a little bit softer, a little bit more the way that I had imagined. Maybe a little bit of a bend there. I think that looks pretty good. Right? I think so. And this needs to bend a little bit more as well. So let's switch these anchor points to change that a little bit around. And where should we move this? Maybe kind of there-ish. And this one a little bit more over. This whole thing actually might be a little too big, but I can fix that in a moment. Let's bring this in to decrease sort of how much of that bend we're getting there. And this one is also causing it. It's a little bit hard to see the anchors there. Let's switch the color just to make it easier for you guys. We'll go with a bright yellow for right now, and I'll get that color back in a few minutes. So over here, I had that anchor that I dragged up, which was a little bit hard to see. It was kind of like that before, and I just dragged it up to decrease that curve and tried to kind of balance them out a little bit. And I can do the same thing over here. You can see that handle's way down there. I'm going to drag it up a little bit, try to soften that out a little bit. And I think that looks pretty good. Maybe bring this in a little bit. Yeah, something like that. I like that. Now let's get that color back. So now that we've switched colors, we have two choices. One, we can click here, and we can see the color here, and we can see that hex code. That should look familiar because we looked at those when we talked a little bit about the SVGs and modifying the SVG code. So I could copy and paste this in to here if I wanted. But what I can also do is while I have this selected, I can tell it that I want this to be a new swatch. And it's going to make sure that this is what I want, and it is. Now here for color mode, I can make some modifications if I want to make it in a certain way, if I want to modify this in a different color scheme that I'm used to, but this is what I want because it's directly from here. So if I press OK, now we have a new color swatch in our swatch palette. And now whenever I want that color, I can just click on what I want and I can tell it to go and grab that color there. So now they're the same. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can see the whole thing. And I do think that this is probably a little too big. With my regular selection tool, I can go in and I can grab a corner and I can make it the size that I want. Now that does affect these paths a little bit, but not too bad. And once again, if any of them are really weird, I can always go back in and modify them with my direct selection tool as well. So something like that. That's looking fairly camera-y to me. Maybe modify this one just a little bit. Let's move this over. And soften that a little bit. Move this down a little bit. That's starting to look fairly camera-like. Move another one there and bring that one down a little bit. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. Now in my drawing, this is all together. I don't have two separate chunks. I have one chunk. And in fact, I need that a little bit on the bottom too, but I'll worry about that in a minute. For right now, let's focus on this, and let's focus on the main body itself. So I need to make some other modifications. So on my on my anchors here, I'm going to switch these also to smooth instead of corners. And I don't remember if I switched this or not, but let's make sure that we do. And so now I want some of these to move around a little bit and to try to start getting that shape that I'm looking for. Let's get a little bit of a bend here and bring this out. This one's actually out a fair amount if you look at the drawing. And we actually have a little bit of a bump there, which I think I do want that. So maybe a point there. I'm starting to move these out a little bit. Let's switch this color also just to make it a little bit easier to see what I'm doing with these points. So where did that point go? There's that point there. A point here. That's the one I wanted to move. I didn't want to move this one so much. Let's actually add another point in there and move this one over a bit. Well, that's a little wonky. So if I pull this up and pull that maybe over a little bit, that's pretty close to what I'm looking for. I think so. Let's go ahead and put this back on the color it was. So from our swatches here. And so now we have two shapes. So if we select both of them, we can merge them. And there's a couple ways to do this, but the way that I like to do it, the way that has been around for a little while, quite a while actually, is using the Pathfinder. And with the Pathfinder, which you can just find it under Window, and it's alphabetical. If for some reason you can't find it, and you're on a Mac, you can use your help feature up here. Ooh, that's not the one we want. We want that one underneath Window. Well, that makes things a little confusing, doesn't it? But it essentially does the same thing. It just looks different. It does it through a menu system instead of through a window. So once we have both selected, make sure you have both selected, not just one, we can go ahead and tell them to unite. And now they are part of one shape. And let's go ahead and add that bottom part on there too. So that just looks like a blue circle to me. And I'm holding shift to try to keep the proportions the same. And it looks about that big to me. Now it's in the wrong spot, so I need to move this up, but something kind of like that. That feels about right to me. And so once again, we can merge these. Now I want this circle to be in the middle of that circle. So actually, it would be smarter if I go ahead and copy and paste that first. And I can start to make this a little bit smaller and try to put it where I want to try to make it feel like it fits correctly. I might actually want this a little bit bigger to accommodate a bigger lens here. I think that looks a little bit better. And just to prevent confusion, let's go ahead and modify this color. So there we go. So starting to look the way that I want. Now let's merge this with that because I don't have an outline around the lens edge. I just have it sort of all flat together. Now if I grab everything and I tell it to merge, that's not what I want, right? So I need to make sure that I'm only clicking on the objects that I want to merge, like so. And then I could grab another circle and I could make it smaller. So I just did copy and paste again. And somewhere kind of around here-ish. I'm holding shift each time I'm making it smaller to try to make the proportions the same. Also, as I'm moving this around, when I find that center, it sort of locks in. There we go. And it should actually say center if you found the exact center of that shape. And let's make this actually, I want it to be like this blue. I actually want it to be a little bit darker, but that might be okay even just the way it is. I can add in a little bit of glare. So these will be white ovals. Now right now, mine is at an angle, and this one obviously isn't, and it's not going to draw it on an angle. So what I have to do is I have to sort of Let's just delete that. I have to create the ellipse about the shape that I want. And then I need to actually go in here just with my selection tool and grab one of these edges and spin it around where I want it to be. And I need one more, so I'm just going to copy and paste another oval, and I'm going to spin it a little bit in the other direction, kind of like that, and make it a bit smaller. Actually, I think this one needs to be a bit bigger, so I'll make that one a little bit bigger. And I'm holding Shift to keep the proportions the way that I have them once again. Kind of like that. I don't know if I quite like that placement, but something like that. Maybe a little bit more angled. Yeah, I think that's getting pretty close. Now I also have this weird little funky shape here. There's a couple ways I can do that. I think the easiest thing is really just to try drawing it. So I'm going to click, and I'm going to click, and I'm holding down still as I'm dragging this out. That's really hard to see. Let's try again. Let's change the color of the body to yellow again. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click here, and I'm going to drag that out. I haven't let go. I'm holding down on that second click and trying to get the shape kind of the way that I want. Then I'm going to actually go ahead and click back up here. And, well, that's a little funky, isn't it? Something sort of like that. That's starting to get kind of the shape that I want. Now, I didn't want it to go all the way down there, so I need to actually change this point, there it is, to a corner, and something like that. Now if I go with my pen tool, I can add in some anchor points, and I can start to move this closer to how I had it illustrated. That is a corner. Let's make that smooth. There we go. I need another point here as well to drag that way out here like it is there, so maybe a point there. And I can start trying to build this the way that I have it illustrated. Now, you might have some trouble with the pen tool and anchor points, and in fact, you probably will. It takes a little getting used to the pen, so if you don't understand it right away, like, don't let it get you down. Just stick with it, try things out. Eventually, you'll get the hang of it. It's not the easiest thing for most people to understand at the start. And even how these handles work is going to take you a little getting used to. So something sort of like that. Now mine is extended out a bit, so maybe I need to move this out a little bit more. That looks pretty decent. I don't like that little bend there. So if I click here and modify that, let's pull it out a little bit, try to smooth it out. Let's pull this one up a little bit, try to smooth that out. That's a bit better. That might be a little too pronounced there, but it's getting there, and you can get the idea. So we're going to make this, oh, that's kind of an issue. All right, so let's put this back on our swatch here. Now, what my issue is this is supposed to be the same color as that, but I've made this the same color as that, and this are to be the same color, but this and this are not. That probably sounded confusing, but basically, if this is the same color as this, they're the same, and that's hard to see. So I'm actually going to go ahead and modify this color, make it maybe closer to that. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to save this as a swatch. So that way, this can be the same color without me having to do any copying and pasting. All right, that looks pretty good. And now I just need two little buttons, and I think we're good. So the buttons are pretty easy. They look just like rounded rectangles to me. Let's switch back to the main color swatch. I think that's what I want it to be. So a little button here and a larger button there, which that's kind of more of the actual, what do we call it? The dial on the camera. Let's rotate this just a little bit to kind of match that area there. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, I think I want a little bit of a gap between the two, or maybe I want these behind it and to be a different color. I think that's what I want. So let's make these the darker swatch. And we'll grab both of them and tell it to send to back. Now, I was very careful that I didn't grab the body itself too, because if I grabbed the body too, send to back would do effectively nothing. But by grabbing just the top two, being careful with my pointer, and send it back. Now they're behind it. And actually, I don't like any of the outlines, so let's get rid of all of the outlines. There we go. That's pretty much what I was envisioning. Playing with the shape tools, creating something out of the shapes. There you go, a camera.